Hello. In this final video on Caribbean slave revolts, let me talk briefly about three significant revolts which occurred in the period following Haitian independence. These reminded both planters and home governments that what had happened in San Domingue could be repeated. We should note that in the British colonies, in addition to the Haitian example, the slaves' knowledge of the work of the British abolitionists, which I talk about in another series of videos, was a factor encouraging resistance. The first of these major uprisings was in the small British sugar colony of Barbados in 1816. There the local planters congratulated themselves that they had not experienced any rebellions for over 100 years, and were perhaps complacent. Soldiers were able to crush the revolt successfully, with reasonable speed and exemplary ruthlessness, but not before 1/4 of the island's sugar crop had gone up in flames, and terrified whites had fled to the island's capital of Bridgetown. Losses of life included over 50 slaves killed during the fighting, and over 200 who were later executed. Another 100 slaves were deported under order of penal servitude, but these ended up being sent to Sierra Leone by the officials in British Honduras, where they'd first been sent, because they didn't want them. This is a good example of the way in which each of the British colonies pursued its own course with little central direction. The Barbados Rebellion sent shockwaves to the other islands, and the Speaker of the Barbados Assembly complained that whilst the insurrection had been quelled, the spirit of rebellion had not been subdued, nor would it be as long as the doctrines of emancipation continued to be propagated amongst the slaves. A second major rebellion broke out in the formerly Dutch colony of Demerara in modern-day Guyana in 1823, where a large proportion, over 4 out of 10, of the slaves were African-born. As sugar prices declined in the 1820s, owners pushed their overseers to force the slaves to work harder and increase production. As news of the work of the new British Anti-Slavery Society reached the territory, rumours of promised emancipation circulated, and many slaves began to think that they had already been granted their freedom in London, but that the local whites were denying them their rights. Eventually, over 9,000 slaves rose in revolt, but the rebellion was suppressed at the cost of some 250 slave lives. A British missionary in whose church the plotters had met was also arrested and sentenced to death, his subsequent death while still in custody enraging many Christians in Britain who denounced the colonial authorities. The third rebellion was in Jamaica in 1831-32. This was particularly well organized, and was led by Sam-Sharpe, a Baptist deacon from Montego Bay, and now a Jamaican national hero. It began just after the Christmas of 1831, and quickly spread through the northwest of the island, under the direction of Sharpe's local agents, and in all at least 20,000 rebels were involved, some in homemade uniforms, seizing control over large areas of territory from which the whites fled in terror. Although the initial intent seems to have been to avoid violence and press for freedom or a living wage, fighting quickly broke out between the rebels and the planters' militia, with around 200 slaves and 14 whites being killed. There was also extensive arson, the great houses of the planters being a particular target for the slaves' wrath. Often built on hills and ridges, these houses became burning beacons marking the spread of the rebellion. Sugarcane warehouses were also torched, and over £1.1 million worth of damage was caused, with more than 200 plantations affected. The revolt was suppressed in January 1832, and punitive, large-scale, and often quite summary executions took place of both known rebels and other suspects, with 340 hangings or shootings recorded. White Jamaicans also took revenge on the missionaries whom they blamed for corrupting the slaves, and several were attacked or jailed, and a score or so Baptist and Methodist chapels were burned down. The rebellion played a crucial role in convincing the new Reform Parliament and government in Britain that slavery must be abolished quickly for good, a development which I describe in my video series on British abolitionism.